Sam Coates, good to see you in DC, a last-minute deployment for you from Westminster to here in Washington.
Thank you for having me. I got an hour's notice to come over, hop on a plane.
I know you and I were both on our holidays and we're both back in the thick of it. It felt like 0 to 60 in a split second here.
How could I refuse the invitation, though? All the glamour of the White House.
All the glamour of the Trump100 studio.
Yes, was I to know that the reality of covering the White House means standing in a bush next to you.
Literally, in a bush. We were in a bush all day. I've never seen the White House quite so busy as it was today. It was a truly long day, and it ended with a post from the president. I'll read it to you because it's highly significant. He said in the last few hours, everyone is very happy about the possibility of peace, capital letters, for Russia-Ukraine. At the conclusion of the meetings, I called President Putin and began the arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelenskyy. After that meeting takes place, we will have a trilat, he says, which will be the two presidents plus myself. So there we are, Trump in front of the world at a table with Europe's leaders who'd hastily rushed to DC. He says he's organising a meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy. Is President Trump really about to bring Putin and Zelenskyy together and find peace in Ukraine? I'm Mark Stone, just back in the Trump100 studio after a whirlwind 14 hours at the White House.
And I'm Sam Coates, Sky News Deputy Political Editor, making a special appearance on today's Trump100 on a momentous day in both America and across Europe. I've also hot-footed it to the studio with you, Mark, after a whole day of live reporting next to you.
Yeah, and you went from the White House to the British Embassy, didn't you, where you've just interviewed Keir Starmer. I guess let's begin there with that. What was his framing of the day?
Look, I think Keir Starmer, like a lot of the European leaders, will have gone home happy. He certainly said he did to me and to other reporters in the British Embassy just now, which was his final stop before he flew home. He said there'd been two big wins. The first, I think, is the biggest one of all, which was he was celebrating the US promise of a security guarantee, which I think is the biggest headline, we'd all agree, out of today. And also just that conversations are going to continue, that there will be further meetings, and that, I think there's a sense that it's not a foregone conclusion, but there is a real opportunity now for peace.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. It's moved very fast. There are achievements, and we'll get into those. But there's also a lot that we still don't know. There's a lot of detail, and as we have become, as has become very clear with this second Trump presidency, the course can change very, very quickly, can't it? So when we think there's progress, suddenly there is a massive setback, or suddenly, Trump moves in a completely different direction that no one expected. But I guess let's begin with just how unusual this was, because as you say, you got an hour's notice to come out here yesterday, Sunday, because all of this was cooked up in the space of what, just 24 hours. Friday, of course, was that moment in Alaska. Saturday, Zelenskyy confirmed he would be coming to the White House. And at that point, the key European leaders realised they needed to be here as well, Starmer among them.
That's right. And I think Keir Starmer was on holiday in Scotland at the point where he realised, he worked out that he needed to be one of those European leaders that flew across the Atlantic to sort of stand shoulder to shoulder with President Zelenskyy to make sure he wasn't bounced into some kind of peace deal that he didn't want. The optics on Friday, when President Trump met President Putin, unnerved European leaders. I've had conversations with diplomats that confirm that. They felt that Donald Trump seemed to be swaying too much in President Putin's direction. He was changing his arguments about whether there was a need for an immediate ceasefire, adopting Putin's position that you didn't need to have a ceasefire up front, but you could concentrate on the peace deal first. And all of that added up to a worrying situation. So there are a couple of goals for leaders, but first and foremost, it was to make sure that there wasn't a bad outcome for the Ukrainian president when he turned up today, and being the wingman of him was sort of aim number one.
A bad outcome being a repeat of February. I mean, we all remember that. I was there at the White House. I have no doubt you were watching it all. Probably your jaw was on the floor, as was mine, in February as we saw that meltdown in the White House.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting?
No. You think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I answer?
Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
There was clearly a desire to make sure that wasn't repeated, but I guess as well a desire to be in the room. I mean, Europe was not in the room in Alaska, and so today they needed to dominate the room, and so they did.
And they dominated the room in a couple of ways. The European leaders met with President Zelenskyy ahead of his meeting with Donald Trump. And I think that's where some of the most serious business was conducted, because we got a sort of preview of the lines that President Zelenskyy was going to use with President Trump. He released a post immediately beforehand talking about his aims for when he got to the White House. And you could see right away there was a much more emollient tone. There was no more demands for an immediate ceasefire. He talked about, in language that echoes that of Donald Trump, a need to stop the killings. There was a praise for the American president. It was almost as if the coaching was being sort of turned into some kind of script, the script we were reading before he went in. European Union leaders were giving him the lines that he needed to use in order to avoid a repeat of February.
And the vibe outside the White House, from 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, the hours passed by, and there was a real sense of anticipation. I have never seen, as I say, the White House, the grounds so busy. Journalists from all around the world, all of them kind of really anticipating how this would unfold, because this is the Trump show. No one quite knows what he's going to do, which direction it's going to go in. And in the crowd, I spotted an old friend of mine, Tanya Kozareva, is a Ukrainian journalist. She works now for the Ukrainian state broadcaster. She's their Washington correspondent. She and I go back a bit, because a couple of years ago she was working for Sky. She was our local producer in Ukraine when I was out there, and she and I spent quite some time on the front lines in the east of Ukraine. In fact, we had this one quite extraordinary moment where we were in the trenches with the Ukrainian military. And we were supposed to be there for about 20 minutes. And then, one thing led to another, and the vehicle that was supposed to take us out of these trenches disappeared. And so we were stuck there for about an hour. And there was incoming from the Russians, and it was a frightening moment, and it was a visceral moment for me, for her as well as a Ukrainian, of just what war looks like in the east of Ukraine, what it looked like then, and what it still looks like now. It was quite a moment, and actually tragic as well, because a week or so after we had been with that Ukrainian unit on the front line, we discovered that whole unit had been wiped out by a Russian attack. She is now in Washington, and I caught up with her to get her sense of just how important this moment was.
Nervous, of course, also very excited, and a lot of feelings, I guess, because last meeting here in White House was a disaster, diplomatic disaster from both sides, I guess, especially I guess a lot of Ukrainians were disappointed that some unimportant things were discussed back then,
like the suit.
Like the suit, yes. It's not important, given that people are dying every day in Ukraine, and it's a matter of lives for many, and I guess many Ukrainians would hope that this meeting will have the outcome, will lead to the peace and end of the war.
So just after we spoke, the Ukrainian president arrived, and in he went. And it was clear, wasn't it, Sam, very quickly, that this Oval Office moment was wholly different from the one back in February.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States.
You could see from the tone that President Zelenskyy adopted right at the start, from his praise for Donald Trump, from the fact he handed over a letter from his wife to Donald Trump's wife, a technique that Donald Trump used on President Putin just on Friday, producing a letter from Melania for Mrs. Putin. And you could tell from the way that he avoided topics that were likely to cause a flashpoint, the most difficult issue, the most emotive issue for the Ukrainian president and Ukrainian people, the possibility of territorial swaps or territorial handover, an issue that has riled and animated President Zelenskyy in the past, but not today.
And the choreography was kind of, I mean, it was all unusual because, we've never had so many key European leaders in the White House at one time and at such short notice. And I mean, the last time there were so many world leaders in the White House was back in the 1960s in the days after JFK's funeral. That was a long time ago. I think Obama had a lot of African leaders in the White House at one point for an African Union summit. But key European leaders in this context, it's unprecedented. They were all there, but they weren't in the Oval Office initially. They were kind of almost in a waiting room. They were in another part of the White House watching, as we were, what was unfolding in the Oval Office. They would have been pleased because it went well.
Yeah, they all arrived by the back door. And then they went in for a buffet lunch, essentially into a sort of holding pen, separated from the real action, which was President Trump's meeting with President Zelenskyy. As it were, they'd prepped their boy, but he had to perform on his own and win over the president in a way that eluded him back in February. It wasn't until kind of an hour and a half on that they got to meet with the president, to do the family photo with him and then sit around the table. And for me, some of the most important remarks from President Trump were those that were delivered when President Trump was sitting around the table with those individual European leaders, because it was then that he made clear a bit more detail of the security guarantee, of the desire to have a trilateral meeting. You just got a greater degree of specificity from Trump. And he was reading from a script, by the way. President Trump had prepared the remarks suggesting that thought had gone into what he was saying. These were the agreed position of him and his senior staff, and this is the course that he was determined to act on. These weren't off-the-cuff remarks. These weren't things thrown out. This was the script that was read out to those leaders appeared to be a settled enunciation of US foreign policy at that point, and that I thought was very important
and extremely unusual for Trump to be scripted like that. But clearly they thought collectively that was important. I was struck too that this is a moment where you have the great disruptor, Donald Trump. In fact, in this case, being the great convener, wasn't he? He has managed to get these people together around one table after he had achieved that meeting with Putin in Alaska. Look, we can argue, and we have, and plenty have, about whether the sort of weird bromance between Putin and Trump in Alaska was unpalatable. The ride in the Beast and all of that, the fly past, how uncomfortable that was. Certainly it was uncomfortable for European leaders, partly why they needed to be in this room over the past 12 hours, and so they were. But what was striking to me is that this great convener, he was holding court in the room. It was clearly his moment. But what I was interested and struck by is that each of the other European leaders, they all said something slightly different. It felt like they were scripted as well. It was Ursula von der Leyen, who, as a mother of, I think, quite a few children, she was the person who made the point about children, about the children, the Ukrainian children who have been taken out of Ukraine, taken to Russia, and them coming back. The emotive point that I think they believe strikes a chord with President Trump. Others had different points to make. They all had a point to make, but none of them felt like they were sort of, probing or irritating Trump. It was all done with effusive praise. You, Mr. Trump, have made this happen. That was all very interesting for me.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It felt like the European leaders had carved up individual points, some of which were challenges to Donald Trump. He didn't take it as such and they weren't couched as such.
Exactly.
But Keir Starmer, for instance, was trying to push Donald Trump on the exact nature of the security guarantees. He referred to Article 5-like guarantees.
With the right approach this afternoon, make real progress, particularly on the security guarantees, and your indication of security guarantees of some sort of Article 5 style guarantees fits with what we've been doing with the Coalition of the Willing, which we started some months ago, bringing countries together and showing that we were prepared to step up to the plate when it came to security. With you coming alongside, the US alongside what we've already developed, I think we could take a really important step forward today. A historic step, actually, could come out of this meeting in terms of security for Ukraine and security in Europe.
Now, that is a reference to NATO's Article 5, which is the sort of joint and several agreement that if one is attacked, others will respond. At some points, some of Donald Trump's staff, some of his colleagues have suggested that what the US will initiate is a sort of Article 5 style protection for Ukraine. It didn't feel like that initially that Donald Trump today was going along with that. Keir Starmer was pushing for a bit of clarity on that. You had Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, suggesting that actually the European leaders weren't prepared to just kick the idea of a ceasefire off into the long grass, but that's something that should be advanced and agreed soon before he suggested their next meeting. So in that round table with European leaders, there was visible difference, but there was a big thing as well, and as we touched on before, I think the security guarantees, the most significant element of what was agreed today. Again, we come back to Donald Trump's words and the words that were on that script. Donald Trump said, "We will now thrash out around the table who does what." And that was a discussion held behind closed doors when the cameras were turned off.
Did Starmer give you any sense of what was discussed?
So Starmer is one of the more elliptical politicians that I have interviewed, and I pushed him on this issue of what these guarantees mean in practice. What have we guaranteed, and what would trigger military action or some kind of retaliation, and what does Article 5 mean in practice? And if I'm being honest, Mark, answer came there, none, nothing of real substance.
What I'm talking about is that should there be a deal, and I hope there is, it needs to be a lasting deal, not a temporary deal, one that is enforced if necessary, where President Putin knows that if he makes a deal and then breaches it, there will be serious consequences. That has been the underlying objective throughout. That is something we've materially moved forward this morning, because what we've now achieved is not only the guarantee of the Coalition of the Willing, the 30 countries that we've put together have already planned for and detailed out, but now working with the US on taking that forward as a coordinated joint guarantee, and that's very, very important.
But clearly, around that table, specific contributions by different nations were discussed. And we do not yet know, but we'll probably find out over the coming hours and days, what different nations put up. Keir Starmer has hinted troops on the ground, maybe as part of the British contribution. At one end, could America offer troops? At other points, people used... there was some people who talked about America's contribution being more of coordination, very different end of the scale. We don't know yet, but that, I think, was possibly the most substantive discussion that took place today. And that bit hasn't yet leaked. That bit we haven't yet got a sense of.
Sam, in a moment, we'll get into what precisely America might be offering in terms of security guarantees. But broadly, what would you say are the wins from today?
The first win was that things didn't go backwards.
Yeah.
There was a very real sense after Friday's Alaska summit that we could have another moment of humiliation for President Zelenskyy. That didn't happen. That's possibly the biggest win of all. We didn't go. Things didn't go south. The US language around security guarantees was Europe's biggest ask, and they got it repeatedly on camera and in a full-throated way from Donald Trump. Now, we don't know the detail of that, but just a public commitment like that.
Serious breakthrough on security guarantees. That's how one diplomatic source put it to me.
And I think that the final thing, and this is more in the space of what wasn't said but is equally important, is that the Americans are publicly pushing President Zelenskyy to begin a conversation about territorial swaps, territorial changes, territorial handover. And that could have been a trigger for President Zelenskyy to
flip out.
To retaliate, to blow up, to take a swipe back. And he didn't do that. I think that there is the beginning of what will be an incredibly difficult conversation, but it's a conversation in the absence of complaint by President Zelenskyy today that can now has a little bit of private space in which it can take place. I think all sides recognised that you couldn't force President Zelenskyy to have that conversation in public. The rhetoric from Keir Starmer to us earlier this evening was, this is a conversation for Ukraine to have. Mm-hmm. But it's a conversation now I feel like they will have, and there's just a little bit of space, a little bit of permission to allow President Zelenskyy to take a message home. There is an opportunity for peace and security, but maybe some of the land that's gone for years isn't coming back.
In terms of the negatives from today, I mean, I think I guess it's detail. We, as you've alluded to, we don't have the detail. What are these security guarantees? Surely not American troops on the ground. Who knows? It seems extremely unlikely. And then, of course, how on earth would Putin respond to that? I mean, that is precisely what he has always... That's why he says he went to war in the first place, because of NATO encroachment into his territory. So you can't see that happening, really. Lots of words, but not much really secured properly. We don't have any detail on any of that. And then Trump not very keen on engaging on a ceasefire. Instead wants to do what he tends to do and skip to the end. He's got a short attention span. Why don't we just get it all done now? Well, as is proving the case, whether it's Israel, Gaza, or indeed here in Ukraine, it is very hard to do that. So plenty of unknowns ahead still. And on the specifics of security guarantees, I mean, a serious breakthrough is how it's being described to me. It is a breakthrough because just in February, the Americans were not willing to entertain the idea of their involvement at all. They were abandoning NATO. They were abandoning Ukraine. That much was very clear in February. That's why there was the meltdown in the Oval Office, because Zelenskyy was saying to Trump, look, I'm not going to agree to ceasefire until you, the Americans, can help us commit to protecting us down the line so Putin doesn't do this all over again. And back then, Trump and Vance were saying, no, this isn't our problem. It's Europe's problem. Something massive has changed. Part of it is the European commitment to increase defence spending. But Trump has shifted position massively. That is a win. But we do not know the detail. We do not know how America is going to guarantee this security. There is some suggestion. I've been talking to contacts today who have suggested that a couple of things that America could do, what they call over-the-horizon defense. I remember Biden talking about this in Afghanistan. So you withdraw from Afghanistan, but then you have this ability with drones, technology, all the rest of it, long-range missiles, to be able to protect a country without actually being in the country, but no boots on the ground. Maybe that's possible with Ukraine, but that's already been done. I mean, Europe, NATO, the Americans have already got missile defense systems in Eastern Europe. Putin didn't like that, which again is why he says he invaded Ukraine. So many unanswered questions.
Look, I think you have to look through how it would work on the ground, how it would work in practice, and you realise that, yes, a huge shift in language, a huge shift in position, but we're still a long way away from something that actually might result in a deal. Think of it like this. Do we actually, Mark, do we really, really think that Britain and other European countries are willing to put themselves in a position where they are retaliating against Russia in order to protect Ukraine in such a way that could put Britain at war with Russia? Do we really think that is what Britain is saying today? Because I'm not sure people are quite going that far. But that's the implication when people talk about Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all, and there'll be some form of consequence as a result. Do we really think that the Americans are going to commit sufficiently and publicly such that the rest of Europe really sort of gets involved? And what is the threshold for retaliation? At what point does it justify a military response from any of the coalition of the winning that take part? All of these three issues and many others are the kind, unresolved as far as we can possibly tell at the moment, that could throw a huge spanner in the works. I put it to you this. It is actually not that hard to say in the abstract that the US can provide a security guarantee when the detail is actually missing, because the detail is the thing that will either make this happen or not.
Sam, I guess a lot of this comes down to the kind of personal rapport that Putin and Trump have, that Trump seems to think he has with the Russian president. We saw it on show in Alaska, and there was an intriguing hot mic moment, as they're known, today, where Trump, talking to France's President Emmanuel Macron, was heard saying, "I think he, Putin, wants to make a deal. I think he wants to make a deal for me. You understand that, as crazy as it sounds." That's a quote from what Trump said to Macron. So Trump seems to believe that for reasons unknown, Putin now wants to make a deal on Ukraine when he has shown absolutely no interest up till now, and indeed as recently as overnight, more bombs on Ukraine. He's shown no interest in a ceasefire and stopping his aggression, and yet apparently for Trump, he now wants to. So this is a matter of a personal relationship, a rapport, a trust that Trump again repeated today that he has in Putin, a trust that no European leader has. What a day! What a day! I do think it was interesting that. If there was a sense, and I've certainly sensed this over the past few months, that what Trump wanted was a quick win and just get a ceasefire, get the peace done now, and doesn't really matter what happens down the line. And when the Europeans saying, yeah, but we've got to have guarantees because Putin will do this again and he'll encroach on other countries in Eastern Europe, Trump was like, whatever. Let's just get peace done now. I did get the sense today that he seems now to recognise that there's no point in getting peace short term if it all unravels in the months and years ahead, because his legacy will matter beyond the next few weeks and months. His legacy, which is what this is partly all about for him, the Nobel Peace Prize and all the rest of it. It matters that this peace lasts. And I do think the likes of Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, who is kind of a grown-up in the room, to use that phrase, he seems to be influencing the president in that respect. You can't just have a short-term fix. It's got to be a long-term fix on that. But as we know, the president, he can change course fast. Achievements now can amount to relatively little later. There's no question, Sam, this meeting today was unprecedented. The tone has shifted for sure. But the end point, for me, it's still impossible to chart. And we do have the tantalizing prospect, Sam, of a bilateral meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky, and then following that, so says Donald Trump, a trilat, as he calls it. He'll join them, the three of them, in the room. Incidentally, it's interesting that Zelensky claims that it was Putin who suggested that the initial meeting should just be the two of them without President Trump. I wonder why that is, but it's certainly something to look out for. They say it might happen in the next few weeks. We will keep a very close eye on that. Sam, great of you to join us.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure. And I'm delighted to be back on the podcast. Maybe I will speak to you once again, maybe even this week.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Remember to email us your questions and thoughts, Trump100@sky.uk, and you can keep up to date with the latest in DC this week by following us on all social media. And of course, you can find Sam on his very own podcast, Politics at Sam.
We'll be back properly on the start of September, weekly episodes on different bits, different deep dives in British politics. Until then.
Excellent. Cheers, Sam. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for having me.